Even as the government bears its intent to step up investment, the question everyone is asking, when will private investment rise? Is the environment conducive enough for this investment? Are profit cycles encouraging enough? To answer these questions, we have a high-powered panel comprising Vishesh Chandyok, CEO, Grant Thornton Bharat, Subrakant Panda, MD IMFA, and also the Senior VP at FICCI. Great to have you both with us. You really have the pulse of what's happening on ground, and it'll be great to get some insight and perspective on how you really see things moving now that we've kick-started 2022 and we're also well past budget 2022. Let me first come to you, Vishesh, on the signals and takeaways that you feel are the most important to track as we sort of head towards a recovery now post the third wave of the pandemic.
Absolutely, Aabha. I think, as you said, we are now firmly into 2022, firmly behind the budget. The thing to note today would be that the budget has actually now matured to be that presentation of the income and expenditure account of the government versus the one day that everybody hopes there'll be big policy announcements. Those big policy announcements now happen through the year. Retrospective tax, that big public procurement policy change that happened in October. So many other reforms now happen through the year, right? So I think, first of all, the budget is not, one day. A budget is not necessarily that reform day anymore. Where are we as far as the economy is concerned? We had the Monetary Policy Committee meeting last week, and obviously we've seen a sort of surprise from the Monetary Policy Committee. The expectation on the street was that we will see at least a reverse repo hike, if not a repo hike, and none of those two happened. I think the MPC has also shown the sort of consistency we saw in the budget. That for the 10th straight time there've been no change to the repo. Now that everybody expects may change as things play out in the future, as we go into April and the June meeting of the MPC. But I think you're just going back to the budget for a minute. Overall, what I'd say is like consistency, the predictability will all go towards building trust, which is so central to the growth. The growth is there. 9.2% last year, expected 8 to 8.5% in the economic survey for FY23. Right? RBI now has said 7.8, but the growth is there. We expect it to be the third, 3 straight years of the fastest growing economy ahead of us. And therefore, the choices the finance minister made was priming the economy with investment, keeping up with that 35% increase in capital expenditure, which we can talk about, versus maintaining the predictability on tax rates, no cuts there, which would have fueled inflation, which remains about at 5.59%.
Okay. Subrakant, let me bring you in on this. A lot of people called it a neutral budget, and questioned whether or not some of the capex that was outlined will actually work in terms of implementation on ground, getting projects started, and then resulting, of course, in growth. What is your view on how the economy is shaping up so far this year?
First, thank you for having me on the show. As far as the budget is concerned, I'm not certainly one of those who would call it a neutral budget. I think it was something which was, which at the very least can be categorized as bold. Obviously the economy is dealing with a situation where we are coming off the unknown situation relating to the pandemic going back a couple of years. It was staging a smart recovery when you had the second wave, which obviously dealt a body blow. But and then you had a third wave, which is of course large in number of cases, but fortunately not in terms of severity, which is why it has perhaps not had an impact. But all said and done, the economy, while staging a recovery, is still in that phase where it needed careful nurturing. And I think what the budget has done and what the finance minister has done is to take a bold step to make a significant increase in the outlay of 35%, as Vishesh was mentioning, to 7.5 lakh crores. If you add the 1 lakh crore extra to be given to the states, that's a huge outlay. Now let's come to the implementation part. Clearly, one does expect that that implementation will be effective, because that is the key to any vision document. It's one thing to have a vision, and of course that needs to be executed on the ground. But I see no reason why it will not be. And in fact, if you look at FY22, where again some questions have been raised in terms of the capital outlay not being fully spent, I believe the number is about 63% till the end of December. But the finance minister, in public interactions, including at FICCI, has expressed confidence that even for FY22, the capex budget will be adequately or properly utilized. I guess you have to take into account that during FY22 you had two waves of COVID, and that undoubtedly must have had a little bit of a setback. But I think end of the financial year push should see us reach close to the target, if not actually achieve it. And carrying that momentum forward, I certainly see that FY23 will be significant in terms of this outlay being properly spent, and that will clearly aid and abet the ongoing economic recovery. And just to add that one point, I think it's good to see that all the policymakers are on board in terms of the approach, because what the RBI has, the governor had said yesterday in his announcements following the MPC meeting, is clearly an accommodative stand, which is supportive of recovery, while keeping a close eye, of course, on inflation and on both the growth front, where as well as the inflation front. I think the outlook is quite good, in the sense that growth is projected 7.8% according to RBI, 8+% according to the economic survey, and of course the inflation forecast for FY23 is to abate to about 4.5%. So I think India is well poised. We have to be careful in it's a delicate balancing act to manage growth while keeping inflation under control. You obviously have to deal with the inevitable tapering which will happen globally in terms of the excess liquidity being pulled back. But I think India is well poised, and the finance minister and policymakers in general have shown a deft handling of the economy, and that will stand us in good stead.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I can just add,
yes,
if I can just
go ahead, Vishesh.
On that capital expenditure, the FY22 budgeted, the budget estimate was 5.54 lakh crores. If you look at the revised estimate is 6 lakh crore plus. So already, the expectation is that we will not only, catch up, we will, spend a lot of money in the next couple of months itself within this financial year.
And do you feel, Vishesh, that private sector capex will also kick in? The companies that perhaps have been waiting for the pandemic to be well past them will now start to implement or action some of those plans that they perhaps have had pending?
Absolutely. I think, again, the economic survey talks about, the bank credit finally picked up, in Q3. Even though NBFC credit remains sluggish, is the words the economic survey use. Certainly, whoever I talk to in industry, depends which sector you are in. Of course, high-touch sectors, still have, some way to recover. But there is definitely newfound initiative behind looking at new projects and investments.
Okay. What are, some of those sectors, Vishesh, if you could just elaborate on that a little bit more for us? Where are we seeing the maximum traction and investment likely to kick in?
As I said, I think it's across pretty much all sectors, other than the high-touch industry. So I can't, I would pretty much end up naming every sector. I don't know too many businesses which are in good shape, who, have balance sheets which are in good shape, who have access to capital. Now, banks' balance sheets are in good shape. Who are not looking at making use of this, economic opportunity of, the growth that Shubhrakant just touched on.
Okay, so let me touch upon manufacturing in particular, Shubhrakant. Let me come to you on that. Do you see perhaps some of the pain receding? What are the challenges you feel the sector still faces? How do you see things improving? How do you see the benefits of schemes like PLI kicking in over the next few months?
So manufacturing is obviously a core sector. If I look at it broadly, and one of the things about manufacturing in India has been that, looking at the last 15-20 years across several governments, the intent to push manufacturing to about 25% of GDP has always been there. But somehow that intent has never translated into actual investments on the ground, the growth in manufacturing. And to that extent, I believe what this government has done in terms of the PLI schemes, which are I think will have a significant impact, because close to 3 lakh odd crores in terms of incentives to be paid out linked to manufacturing growth in 13 or 14 sectors. That's not a small sum of money, and that's something which will bring about growth and, more importantly, create global champions, because I believe that is the intent of PLI, which is not to have a permanent sort of an incentive structure in play, but to give that initial boost so that those sectors where there is either a high import bill, or there is a rationale for India, especially so, to be self-reliant or Atmanirbhar. Those are the sectors which have been targeted, and I believe that schemes in general will have a significant boost to manufacturing. Now, there are several other aspects which affect the manufacturing ecosystem. One is the ease of doing business, and that is again an area where the government has done a significant amount of work. Looking at the pandemic period as a crisis which should not be be let go, as they say. And from the FICCI side, I can tell you that we have had multiple interactions at all levels of government, and there is clearly that intent to bring about significant change in the ease of doing business. So a lot of rules, regulations have been repealed, a lot of reliance placed on self-certification, etc., for industries, all of which will come in handy. We believe, in as much as the manufacturing ecosystem in India is concerned, there is another aspect, which is the cost of doing business. If I were to take a sector like logistics, for example, there's a clear 400 to 500 basis points difference between what our logistics costs are and that of similar competing economies, which needs to be addressed. If you look at power sector, for example, there is a lot of cross subsidy which impacts the cost of power for large industries. And these are all issues which need to be tackled. Now, if I were to again go back to the government capex which has been outlined for FY23, a lot of it is aimed at public infrastructure in the logistics area, and that has a multiplier effect, not just in providing an immediate boost to the economy, boost to employment, etc. But when complete, it is something I believe which will bring down the cost of doing business in India, and that certainly bodes very well for manufacturing sector. If I can add one more point to your previous question about when does private sector investment kick in? Private sector investment obviously has been a little sluggish, both on account of the uncertainty relating to to COVID, which is fortunately now, I would say, receding, as well as the fact that private consumption is one of those areas which has yet to pick up. It is still below pre-pandemic levels, and that is where again it was very important in this budget to sort of provide a big boost to consumption, and that I believe has been done through the capex outlay by the government sector. And the effects of the pandemic receding, the uncertainty associated with the pandemic receding, and the fact that we expect consumption to pick up is what will provide the necessary impetus to private sector investment as well.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that a bit more, Vishesh. On the consumption front, demand generation, I mean, while it's anticipated there'll be that collateral effect, if we take a look at the moment, things are still relatively subdued. We're not seeing the same kind of revenge or pent-up action that we saw after earlier waves. What's your sense?
The economic survey summed it up, right? Yeah. It said government consumption as well as exports were back at 110% of the pre-pandemic levels, whereas private consumption was still at 97%, I think. Right? So, we can see that if you look at the results of particularly sectors which are dependent on rural demand, the two-wheeler, tractors, etc. There are supply-side constraints, but there are also clearly demand constraints because of the bottom of the pyramid impact of the pandemic that Shubhakant just touched on.
All right. And, when it comes to the kind of ease of doing business that Shubhakant was also pointing out, Do you feel there are still significant challenges for companies in order to scale? Because if we take a look at the more unorganized informal sector, for example, and they've seen the brunt, of course, of successive moves, whether it be GST, Demon, COVID, they have taken a lot longer to get back as opposed to some of the bigger companies and the kind of deal flow we're seeing there. Are you also observing an uneven recovery?
No question about it. I think, clearly, if you were in the informal sector even before the pandemic, with the introduction of things like GST, you face challenges with demonetization, etc. So I don't think that has changed. I think clearly, if you want to operate in the supply chain, and you saw in the budget, the new norm, very much like you have on the direct tax side, the responsibility is with the company that is claiming the input tax credit to ensure that people in your supply chain have uploaded, have paid their tax and uploaded the information. Otherwise, you're going to be denied the credit. So I think clearly you need to be in the formal ecosystem if you want to grow and progress along with India. You need to pay your taxes, contribute to that development. So that message is quite clear.
Shubhrikant, do you also feel a lot of what the government spoke about in terms of digitization, in terms of trying to create further formal processes, will also help in terms of increasing efficiency and creating better infrastructure, digital infrastructure for industry?
Oh, absolutely. Clearly there has been a thread of digitalization running through the various aspects of the budget, be it the health sector, where they've talked about putting all service providers, etc., on a common platform. So there are multiple examples running through the budget in terms of where the government has tried to focus on technology and on digitalization, which I believe is the way forward. And clearly the economy has to formalize even more going ahead. And it is in that on that path, I should say, rather. If you look at the consistently high GST collections being above 1 lakh crores for I think 4 or 5 months in a row, and the January figures being the highest ever, if I'm not mistaken, all of that points to the fact that the economy is formalizing at a rapid pace, and that is the way to go. And equally, of course, there are revenue loopholes which have been effectively plugged, and that has led to the higher GST collections. But yes, I do agree that digitalization and a focus on technology is evident in many aspects of government, and I believe that is perhaps a result of the Prime Minister's vision as well of a new India. And you certainly can't envision new India without being a tech leader, right?
Absolutely. Vishesh, what about the sunrise sectors that the finance minister also alluded to in the budget speech, with an eye to opening up investments and really looking at the future in terms of building technology in some of these areas? You have an insight into the kind of action and deal flow we're seeing across some of these spaces. What really do you feel is the potential and opportunity here?
Yeah, I think, clearly 1 or 2 areas. First, let me talk about what the expectation was, which was not addressed in the budget. For example, some clarity on overseas listings, whether it was a direct overseas listing or into the SPAC route. Capital is so important for these new sunrise sectors, right? And there was an announcement that was made as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat announcements during the pandemic, and one was expecting some clarification, and that clarification hasn't come in a long time. Finally, there was a hope that it'll come in the budget, but again, that's not happened. I think even pharma has been included now in as a sunrise sector. So I think as far as deals are concerned, you're seeing that on the ground. Again, difficult to single out any one sector, but the drivers are very clear. Right? It's the consumer, the direct to consumer companies. It's the companies that will play out in the digital ecosystem. It's the companies that will play out in the healthcare ecosystem, in the education ecosystem, are the ones that have to benefit and gain as India formalizes. And of course, in the infrastructure ecosystem as well with this huge spend.
Absolutely. So a lot that one can anticipate. I also want to just get a word in from you on the LTCG that was capped when it came to certain transactions that, especially in the startup space, they were also celebrating that. Is that a step in the right direction, Vishesh?
Absolutely. It's the same way where effectively the long-term capital gains has been, the surcharge has been limited to 15%, which has a 2.5 to 4.5% net saving if you were to invest in things like startups and have long-term capital gains. So it is an incentive to back those companies, those sunrise sectors, as you said.
All right. And would the industry have liked to see more? Where else could they have tinkered with in order to really make everyone happy?
I think industry, is quite happy if there isn't too much tinkering. I think all the basic ingredients are there. Shubhrakant can come in on this subject. But I think industry really likes that consistency, predictability, focusing actually on building trust. Even the announcement on taxing the virtual digital assets. People have welcomed, because when it was a grey area, the other alternative would have been until there is a crypto law in the country, you can't tax it. Yeah. At least now there's clarity of a tax versus, and even though that tax is as if you were gambling or it's at the same level as lottery winnings, but still there is predictability and transparency to everyone. So I think from industry's perspective, no change is really what investors and industry looks for. Okay. In terms of what more can be done, almost everybody would say, high-touch industries, aviation, hospitality, etc. Yeah. In whatever way, irrespective of size, we could support. Those at the bottom of the pyramid impacted the most with the pandemic. Even the government's done, right? What you receive from employers, if an employee lost their life or COVID benefit, that was announced earlier, but has been confirmed as tax exempt. So the government's done things, but there's not enough you can do there. People would say that the investment-led growth will take time to translate into jobs and to translate into cash in the hands of people in the rural economy. Could you have cut rates at the bottom of the pyramid potentially? But it would also be inflationary, right? And that's why inflation where it is, it was best avoided. That's what's enabled the RBI to maintain that monetary policy. Can you imagine if the tax rate was cut at the bottom, at the bottom tiers, would the RBI have taken the same call? I'm not sure.
If I can just come in here, you asked, about tinkering. In fact, I think one of the best things about this budget is that there hasn't been tinkering, as Vishesh was also referred to. The, consistency and predictability of policies is what industry and investors look forward to. And, that's been the case in the last budget as well as this one. And the fact that there hasn't been tinkering around the edges, and in fact, it has been like a bold, vision-oriented budget is what I think has got it high marks and a good response on stock exchanges on the day and the week thereafter. As to what else can be done, if I were to take the liberty of answering that as well, broadly, I reiterate. I mean, I agree with what Vishesh has mentioned about the high touch point sectors. Of course, 50,000 crores has been set aside, targeted, especially at the hospitality and related sectors. But one has to see how how things pan out, because that's one area which has been the most affected. Be it the first, second, or third waves, and that it is important to provide them handholding. And again, at the FICCI interaction, the finance minister was very gracious when she said that she would personally make sure that she's present at an interaction and to see what best can be done for these sectors. And I think that was a very nice personal touch on her part. That apart, I think there is inherent conservatism in the revenue projections in the budget, because if I'm not mistaken, I think the revenue growth is projected at about 11% or so. Whereas if you take even the RBI projections of 7.8% growth and 4.5% inflation, that adds up to the nominal growth will be about 12.3. If you take the economic survey projections, a little bit more. So I believe it's there is a little bit upside potential in as much as revenue is concerned, and that will give the government flexibility going ahead to respond to eventualities or have a little bit more in the kitty to direct at sectors which need support. And going into the budget, one of the expectations was that there would be an urban equivalent of Manrega to take care of urban poor. But I believe the thought process in this budget is a little bit more longer term than having a short term approach. and that is to sort of ensure employment through investment, the investment cycle, might take a little bit of time for it to bite in and for that to have an impact. But I think the quality of growth and the quality of job creation that way will be much better than any short-term SOPs. And I think one of the good things again has been no tinkering, and the fact that despite significant state level elections taking place, the finance minister has stayed away from the temptation of anything, to by way of SOPs, and focused on the right thing to do, which will set India on the path of growth towards not just a $5 trillion economy, but beyond that in this crucial 25 years as we get to our 100 years of independence.
Fabulous. Great speaking with both of you, and wonderfully detailed view on some of the policy initiatives early this year and what to anticipate in 2022 as we set off on the path of recovery and growth. Thank you both so much for joining us here on BT Brainstorm. Great to have you with us.